The sudden silence felt wrong. German artillery officers had learned to trust their instincts during years of combat across North Africa and Russia. Now, west of St. Lo in Normandy, that morning quiet on July 25, 1944, carried an ominous weight that made seasoned veterans uneasy. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein commanded what remained of Panzer Lehr Division. Through his field glasses, he watched American positions that had been chattering with artillery fire for 6 solid weeks since D-Day. The harassment fires had become part of daily routine, background noise that soldiers learned to ignore. But this morning was different. At 09:37 hours, the American guns had simply stopped. No trailing shots, no random rounds. Complete silence stretched across the Norman countryside, where hedgerows still held patches of early morning mist. Veterans occupying positions along the Perrier-St. Lo road had survived Stalin's artillery in Russia. They had endured British barrages at El Alamein. These were men who understood artillery. They knew the rhythms of bombardment, the patterns of conventional warfare. Nothing in their extensive combat experience prepared them for what would happen at exactly 09:38 hours. What came next would shatter their understanding of how wars were fought. Over 1,000 American artillery pieces fired together in one coordinated moment, not in sequence, not in rolling patterns, not following any military doctrine they recognized. Every gun fired at once. The shells had been launched from different distances. Some howitzers sat 6 miles away. Others fired from positions 15 miles back. Heavy guns reached across 20 miles of countryside. Each shell followed its own ballistic arc through the Norman sky. But every shell would arrive at exactly the same instant. Light 105mm howitzers contributed their share. Medium 150mm guns added weight to the barrage. Heavy 8-inch howitzers delivered massive destruction. Enormous 240mm batteries sent shells the size of garbage cans toward German positions. The mathematical precision required for this coordination exceeded anything artillery officers of previous wars had imagined possible. Each battery had calculated not just range and direction. They had computed time of flight down to the second. A 105mm shell fired at high angle might require 23 seconds to reach its target. A 150mm round from a distant position might need 31 seconds. Fire commands had been staggered backward from the moment of impact. Each battery received orders to fire at precisely the calculated second that would ensure unified arrival. German defenders were about to experience something revolutionary, not just an artillery barrage, a demonstration of American industrial coordination and mathematical precision applied to warfare. A synthesis of technology, communication, and organizational capability that would destroy not only their defensive positions, but their fundamental concepts of military science. This was time-on-target artillery, and it would change warfare forever. Understanding the revolutionary nature of this technique requires examining artillery doctrine as it existed in 1944. For centuries, artillery had followed predictable patterns that military professionals understood. Napoleon's grand batteries massed guns to fire in sequence, creating sustained bombardment. World War I's rolling barrage walked ahead of infantry at predetermined rates, providing moving cover. The Germans had perfected their own artillery doctrine through successful campaigns. Concentrated fire, called Schwerpunkt, focused overwhelming force at decisive points. German artillery doctrine had been refined through victories in Poland, France, and the early stages of the Russian campaign. German forward observers worked closely with battery commanders. They could bring accurate fire on targets within minutes. The Wehrmacht prided itself on this flexibility and speed of response. German officers considered their artillery superior to anything the Americans possessed. This assessment wasn't entirely wrong based on early encounters. American artillery in North Africa had initially struggled with coordination problems. At Kasserine Pass, Dispersed batteries had failed to concentrate their fire effectively against German attacks. But German officers had missed something crucial about their American opponents. The Americans were learning, adapting, applying industrial management principles to the ancient art of artillery warfare. The development of time on target represented a fundamental shift in military thinking. Rather than seeing artillery as individual batteries supporting local units, American planners conceived of artillery as an integrated system. A coordinated network that could deliver overwhelming force at precise moments across vast distances. Executing time-on-target barrages required four interconnected innovations that German forces had not fully grasped. These technological and organizational advances would prove decisive in the coming battle. The first innovation was the forward observer system. Unlike German observers who typically worked with single batteries, American forward observers could call upon entire artillery groups. Even corps-level assets responded to their requests. Each forward observer carried SCR-609 radios that provided reliable communication to fire direction centers miles behind the front lines. These radios operated on FM frequencies between 27 and 38.9 MHz. Later models provided 20 to 32 watts of output with reliable 5-mile range. The second innovation was the fire direction center concept. The FDC was essentially a mathematical calculating center where trained personnel used firing tables, slide rules, and graphical firing boards. They computed firing solutions for multiple batteries simultaneously. Communication infrastructure formed the third element. Americans laid telephone wire with obsessive intensity. A single infantry division might lay 3,000 miles of telephone wire in 1 month of combat. These redundant networks ensured that fire missions could be transmitted instantly to dozens of batteries. The fourth element was standardization. American ammunition was manufactured to exact specifications in factories from Pennsylvania to California. A 105mm shell fired from any howitzer would have predictable ballistic characteristics. This consistency enabled the precise calculations required for time-on-target coordination. German ammunition, increasingly produced by slave labor in dispersed facilities, showed growing variability that made such precise calculations impossible. The German army had first encountered limited time-on-target techniques in Italy during early 1944. Many officers dismissed these as lucky coincidences rather than deliberate tactics. The concentrated firepower during the Anzio breakout on May 23, 1944, provided a larger-scale demonstration that gained German attention. 16 battalions of artillery, over 200 guns, had delivered coordinated fire on German positions along the Caesar Line. The technique had been refined through months of practice. The 9th Infantry Division had conducted experimental TOT barrages in Sicily. The 1st Infantry Division had improved the technique in Italy. By D-Day, TOT was becoming standard American doctrine. German intelligence had dismissed early reports as exaggeration. They would soon learn their mistake. July 25, 1944, marked the beginning of Operation Cobra and the full unveiling of American time-on-target capabilities. General Omar Bradley had concentrated the largest artillery force yet assembled by the U.S. Army in Europe. Over 1,000 tubes ranged from 105mm howitzers to 8-inch guns. The 7th and 8th Corps alone contributed 522 guns. 4.2-inch mortars and tank destroyers firing as artillery supplemented the massive force. The target area formed a rough rectangle 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep south of the Perrier-Saint Lô Road. This zone contained the bulk of Panzer Lehr Division and elements of the 5th Paratroop Division. Approximately 5,000 combat troops occupied fortified positions across this area. At 9:38 hours, following carpet bombing by heavy bombers that had already stunned the defenders, every American gun fired. Shells launched from distances ranging from 5,000 to 25,000 yards converged on their targets in a coordinated moment of destruction. The U.S. Army had allocated 170,000 artillery shells for Operation Cobra, 140,000 rounds for 7th Corps, and 27,000 for 8th Corps represented a staggering concentration of firepower. The barrage lasted in precise intervals. Successive time-on-target concentrations walked through German positions with mathematical precision. Then came silence. Then American infantry advanced into positions that no longer existed as coherent defensive lines. Panzer Lehr Division had entered Normandy with 14,000 men and 190 tanks. After experiencing coordinated American artillery, it essentially ceased to exist as a fighting force. General Fritz Bayerlein reported to Field Marshal von Kluge his famous assessment. "My front lines looked like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or numbed." What German commanders couldn't fully comprehend was the mathematical precision underlying time-on-target techniques. This wasn't simply about firing many guns simultaneously. It involved solving complex ballistic equations in real time with unprecedented accuracy. Consider the computational problem that American fire direction centers solved routinely. Making shells from different guns arrive together required knowing the exact location of each battery, the precise distance to each target, the muzzle velocity of each gun type, the weight and aerodynamic characteristics of each shell type. Wind speed and direction at various altitudes affected trajectory. Air temperature and density changed ballistic performance. For long-range fire, even the rotation of the Earth became a factor. Powder temperature affected muzzle velocity and had to be calculated. The Americans had developed graphical computation tools that allowed rapid calculation of these complex problems. The graphical firing table and graphical sight table enabled fire direction centers to compute solutions faster than German artillery using conventional methods. German artillery, still relying on traditional firing tables and individual battery calculations, couldn't match this computational speed. Their most experienced gunners required minutes to solve problems that American FDCs solved in seconds. The ability to execute time on target depended on communication networks that dwarfed anything Germans had encountered. By July 1944, a typical American infantry division in Normandy operated more radio sets than an entire German corps had possessed in 1940. The 1st Infantry Division alone operated over 900 radio sets by August 1944. Every artillery battery maintained multiple redundant communication systems. Wire, radio, and messenger networks provided backup options. Fire direction centers maintained direct lines to every battery, every forward observer, and higher headquarters. This communication superiority enabled something German officers found almost incomprehensible: the ability to mass dispersed artillery instantly without physical concentration. American batteries spread over 20 miles of front could deliver their shells to a single point simultaneously. The coordination achieved through these communication networks allowed American artillery to respond with unprecedented speed. A forward observer could call for fire support and have rounds landing on target within 3 minutes. Multiple batteries could engage the same target from different directions simultaneously. What German officers slowly began to understand was that time on target represented more than tactical innovation. It demonstrated American industrial and organizational capability applied directly to warfare. The standardization that made TOT possible extended throughout American military production. Every 105mm howitzer, whether manufactured by Rock Island Arsenal or Watertown Arsenal, had identical ballistic characteristics. Every shell, whether produced in Pennsylvania or Missouri, met exact specifications. This standardization, achieved through mass production techniques, enabled the precise calculations required for coordinated fire. German production, increasingly disrupted by bombing and reliant on dispersed manufacturing using slave labor, couldn't achieve such consistency. Ammunition quality varied between factories. Gun characteristics differed based on manufacturing location and available materials. The American ability to mass-produce not just weapons, but trained personnel astounded German professionals. The U.S. Army's Fire Direction Center training program at Fort Sill graduated thousands of qualified FDC personnel throughout the war. The program compressed decades of artillery science into 17 weeks of intensive instruction. Students learned ballistics, meteorology, survey techniques, and communications. Most importantly, they learned to think of artillery as an integrated system rather than individual guns. Training emphasized practical application over theoretical knowledge. Students performed thousands of simulated fire missions. They calculated TOT solutions until the process became automatic. By graduation, a competent FDC team could calculate a 10-battery TOT mission in under 180 seconds. This mass production of technical expertise astounded German professionals who encountered it in combat. The Americans had trained more fire direction specialists in 3 years than Germany had produced in decades. They approached military education like factory production, standardized, efficient, scalable. The German counteroffensive at Mortain, launched August 7, 1944, provided a devastating demonstration of American TOT capabilities in defensive operations. Hitler had ordered a massive counterattack to cut off the American breakthrough. The rebuilt 2nd SS Panzer Division, 1st SS Panzer Division, and 116th Panzer Division committed to the assault. As German armor concentrated for the attack, American forward observers watched from Hill 317. When the German assault began at midnight, they called for TOT missions on pre-registered coordinates that had been calculated in advance. The 2nd Infantry Division alone fired up to 20 TOTs during a single night. The American 30th Infantry Division, though outnumbered, called in TOT missions from 7 separate artillery battalions throughout the dark hours. Each mission delivered instantaneous devastation on German assembly areas, approach routes, and command posts. The concentrated firepower created what German survivors described as solid walls of hot steel that made advance impossible. By dawn, the German attack had stalled completely. Field Marshal von Kluge reported to Hitler that continuation of the offensive was impossible against such artillery superiority. The coordinated American response had shattered German offensive capability within hours. The execution of time on target required not just skill, but overwhelming material resources. A single TOT mission might expend more ammunition than a German division received in an entire month of operations. During Operation Cobra alone, American artillery fired over 170,000 rounds in support of the breakthrough. The logistical system delivered thousands of tons of ammunition daily to frontline positions. Trucks ran continuously from Normandy beaches to battery positions, creating an unbroken chain of supply that German forces couldn't match or effectively interdict. The quality of American ammunition also exceeded German expectations. Each shell was manufactured to exacting tolerances with consistent propellant quality and precise weight distribution. This standardization enabled the accurate time-of-flight calculations essential for coordinated fire. German ammunition, by contrast, showed increasing variability as production became dispersed and quality control deteriorated. German artillery officers had to test-fire new ammunition batches to determine actual velocity and range characteristics. Americans could assume their shells would perform exactly to specification. One aspect of time on target that particularly impressed German artillery professionals was American mastery of meteorological effects on ballistics. Accurate TOT required precise knowledge of wind speeds at various altitudes, air pressure, temperature, and humidity throughout the atmosphere. The Americans had deployed an extensive meteorological service throughout their forces. Every corps maintained weather sections that took readings every 30 minutes around the clock. Radiosondes, weather balloons with radio transmitters, provided atmospheric data up to 30,000 feet altitude. This meteorological information was immediately distributed to all fire direction centers through the communication network. Artillery units could adjust their calculations for current atmospheric conditions with remarkable precision. This attention to atmospheric variables enabled American artillery to maintain accuracy even in rapidly changing weather conditions. During the November offensive in the Hurtgen Forest, American TOW-T missions maintained precision despite fog, rain, and variable winds that would have disrupted German artillery effectiveness. The Battle of Hurtgen Forest demonstrated that time on target could be devastatingly effective even in dense woodland that Germans had considered artillery-proof terrain. The Americans developed tree-burst TOW-T missions, timing shells to detonate in the forest canopy above German positions. In November 1944, the 4th Infantry Division attacking through the forest called for TOW-T missions using a mixture of high explosive and white phosphorus shells. The coordinated tree bursts created what survivors described as instant hell raining down through the forest. Wood splinters driven downward like spears mixed with burning phosphorus that ignited the forest floor. Smoke and flame filled the woods while deadly fragments swept through German positions at ground level. The 28th Infantry Division attacking toward Schmidt used TOW-T barrages to clear German strongpoints throughout the dense woods. One concentrated mission on November 6th involved 12 battalions firing into a 500-meter square area. Over 3,000 shells arrived within 30 seconds, obliterating German positions that had held for weeks. The dense woods actually enhanced the effect by muffling sound, so shells arrived with even less warning than in open terrain. German medical services documented unprecedented rates of what they termed artillery-induced trauma among Hurtgen veterans. Soldiers who remained functional after conventional bombardments were psychologically broken by the coordinated devastation of TOW-T in the confined forest environment. The encirclement of German forces in the Falaise Pocket in August 1944 provided the most concentrated demonstration of time-on-target effectiveness against mobile forces. As German units struggled to escape through the narrowing gap, American artillery delivered continuous TOW-T missions on all escape routes. On August 17th alone, American artillery executed documented TOW-T missions on the Falaise-Argentan road at 30-minute intervals throughout daylight hours. Each mission involved 10 to 15 batteries delivering coordinated devastation on German columns attempting to flee the pocket. General Hans Eberbach, commanding the remnants of Panzer Group West, reported that concentrated artillery fire was so intense that it became impossible to bring up reserves or evacuate the wounded. Vehicle movement during daylight became suicide. The road through Falaise became known as the Corridor of Death. Destroyed vehicles, dead horses, and abandoned equipment created obstacles that slowed movement, making subsequent units even more vulnerable to precisely timed TOW-T strikes. By August 21st, when the pocket finally closed, 50,000 German soldiers had been captured and 10,000 killed, with artillery accounting for the majority of casualties. The systematic application of coordinated fire had turned retreat into massacre. As German forces retreated toward the Seine in late August, they discovered that even river crossings offered no respite from TOW-T barrages. American forward observers had infiltrated ahead of main forces, establishing positions overlooking every potential crossing site. At Vernon, Rouen, and Mantes, German attempts to establish pontoon bridges were met with immediate TOW-T responses. The precision was such that bridges were destroyed while still under construction, often with engineer units still working on them. The systematic destruction of crossing attempts through precisely timed artillery demonstrated the technique's flexibility. German units began refusing to cross during daylight hours, creating massive traffic jams on the western banks that became targets for additional TOT missions. By December 1944, the Americans had integrated new technologies that made time on target even more devastating than before. The VT variable time fuse, known as the proximity fuse, was first used in ground artillery during the Battle of the Bulge. These revolutionary fuses detonated shells at optimal height above ground for maximum fragment dispersion. When VT-fused shells were incorporated into TOT barrages from December 1944 onward, the lethality increased dramatically. Shells detonating at optimal height created uniform patterns of destruction that no foxhole or slit trench could protect against. Over 22 million proximity fuses were produced during the war, transforming artillery effectiveness in the conflict's final months. The Germans initially believed the Americans had developed entirely new types of weapons. Intelligence reports speculated about controlled aerial mines or time-delay cluster munitions. The truth, that it was simply precise timing combined with proximity fuses, seemed too simple for such devastating effect. As American forces approached the Siegfried Line in September 1944, German commanders believed their fortifications would finally provide protection from TOT barrages. The concrete bunkers and steel cupolas had been designed to withstand sustained artillery bombardment using conventional techniques. The Americans developed specialized TOT missions for attacking fortified positions. By combining instant impact high-explosive shells with delayed fuse armor-piercing projectiles, they achieved surface explosions and penetrating impacts in unified strikes. At Geilenkirchen in November, the 84th Infantry Division faced extensive Siegfried Line fortifications. The attacking units called for a TOT mission from 12 battalions, 144 guns total, firing a carefully calculated mixture of ammunition types. Surface bursts from high-explosive rounds created blast effects, while armor-piercing shells with delay fuses penetrated concrete structures. The coordinated impact occurred within seconds, overwhelming defensive positions that had been considered impregnable. During the German Ardennes offensive in December 1944, time on target proved its defensive value against major enemy operations. Though initially caught off guard by the surprise attack, American artillery units quickly recovered and began delivering TOT missions on German spearheads. On December 19th, as the 2nd Panzer Division approached Dinant, forward observers from the 3rd Armored Division called for emergency TOT support. Within 4 minutes, 8 battalions had calculated firing solutions for the advancing German column. The resulting barrage caught the German formation in march formation on the road, destroying the lead battalion within 60 seconds. The ability to mass fires quickly through coordinated techniques proved crucial in containing German penetrations throughout the offensive. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces called for TOT missions danger close to their own positions, devastating German assault formations attempting to breach the perimeter. The precision of American artillery allowed defensive fires to be placed within 200 meters of friendly positions. As American forces approached the Rhine in March 1945, time on target reached its zenith of destructive capability. The river crossing operations were supported by massive artillery concentrations using TOT principles on an unprecedented scale. At the Wesel crossing on March 24, 1945, the Allies concentrated 4,000 guns with 270 American pieces participating in the coordinated bombardment. The opening bombardment lasted 4 hours, with coordinated TOT strikes at 15-minute intervals. Each strike involved hundreds of guns achieving unified impact across kilometer-wide target areas. The scale was unprecedented in military history. In preparation for the crossing, American artillery fired over 65,000 tons of ammunition during March 1945 alone. German defenders reported that the bombardment was so intense that concussion alone caused casualties. Soldiers were found dead without any visible wounds, killed by the overpressure from thousands of shells arriving simultaneously. At Oppenheim, where Patton's Third Army crossed on March 22nd, the supporting TOT barrage involved 33 battalions, over 400 guns, firing in perfect coordination. The barrage lasted 60 seconds and delivered 10,000 shells onto German positions. German commanders reported that entire battalions simply ceased to exist, with no survivors to report what had happened. The systematic destruction achieved through coordinated fire exceeded anything in previous military experience. What German officers gradually recognized was that time on target represented the application of American industrial methods to warfare. The same principles that enabled Detroit to produce a bomber every hour enabled American artillery to coordinate hundreds of guns with factory-like precision. This industrial approach extended far beyond the battlefield itself. American factories produced artillery shells in staggering quantities, over 8 million rounds monthly, by late 1944. The transportation system delivered these shells from ports to firing batteries in a continuous flow that never ceased. Communication networks coordinated this vast enterprise with business-like efficiency. Every aspect of the system was designed for maximum output and minimum waste, applying mass production principles to military operations. The psychological trauma inflicted by time on target extended far beyond immediate casualties among German forces. German medical services documented unprecedented rates of combat neurosis, specifically linked to coordinated bombardment experiences. Veterans who had endured hours-long Soviet barrages on the Eastern Front were broken by 30-second TOT bombardments in the West. The instantaneous nature removed all psychological coping mechanisms that soldiers had developed through previous combat experience. There was no escalation to prepare mentally for the impact, no rhythm to anticipate or recognize, no pattern to understand or adapt to. German field hospitals reported that soldiers experiencing multiple TOT barrages exhibited unique symptoms. Paralysis triggered by sudden sounds became common. Inability to process multiple stimuli simultaneously affected basic functioning. Profound fear of synchronicity itself developed among survivors who had experienced coordinated bombardments. Unlike traditional shell shock, which might improve with rest and time away from combat, these symptoms persisted even after evacuation to rear areas far from the front lines. Fritz Bayerlein's assessment became the most quoted German description of TOT effects. "My front lines looked like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or numbed." General Hans Eberbach provided equally crucial testimony about the systematic nature of American artillery superiority. The fire curtain was so dense that it was impossible to bring up reserves or to evacuate the wounded. The Americans have developed a system of artillery concentration that exceeds anything we imagined possible. Captured documents from Wehrmacht headquarters revealed desperate attempts to counter American TOT capabilities. A weapons testing office report concluded, "American coordinated fire technique represents technological superiority in computational devices and communication integration. No effective countermeasure exists with current German capabilities." German attempts to replicate TOT techniques revealed the systemic disadvantages they faced. They understood the mathematics and could calculate time of flight, but lacked everything else required for effective coordination. Standardized ammunition was unavailable due to dispersed production. Reliable communications were limited by equipment shortages. Trained personnel were scarce due to training limitations. The industrial foundation that made American coordinated fire possible simply didn't exist in wartime Germany. German attempts at coordinated fire typically involved no more than 3 or 4 batteries and achieved only approximate simultaneity. The largest German attempt during the Nordwind Offensive in January 1945 involved 8 batteries but achieved impact dispersion over 12 seconds, far from American precision. As American forces drove into Germany in early 1945, time-on-target barrages became routine preliminaries to any attack. The psychological effect had become so pronounced that often the mere threat of coordinated fire prompted surrender. At Cologne, the garrison commander surrendered after experiencing a single 60-second taut barrage on March 5th, reporting that further resistance was militarily pointless against such artillery superiority. The pattern repeated across the collapsing Reich. Commanders who had fought tenaciously for years capitulated after brief TOT bombardments. The combination of overwhelming firepower and mathematical precision had created a weapon that transcended purely physical destruction. Soviet observers studied American time-on-target techniques with intense interest throughout the final months of the war. The British, despite being allies, were equally impressed by the systematic nature of American artillery coordination. Field Marshal Montgomery wrote in his memoirs, "American time-on-target demonstrated that warfare had become a matter of industrial and organizational superiority. Traditional military virtues, courage, discipline, tactical skill, became secondary to systematic application of overwhelming firepower." The German experience with coordinated American artillery fundamentally influenced post-war military thinking worldwide. When the Bundeswehr was established in 1955, coordinated fire capability became a primary requirement for its artillery forces, explicitly citing wartime experience with American TOT. The French Artillery School revised its entire curriculum based on German accounts of coordinated fire effectiveness. The Israeli Defense Forces, established in 1948, incorporated TOT principles from the beginning, advised by Jewish American veterans who had served in artillery units. NATO doctrine explicitly incorporated TOT principles as essential for defeating numerically superior Warsaw Pact forces. The emphasis on coordination and precision became central to Western military planning throughout the Cold War. General Johannes Steinhoff, Luftwaffe fighter ace who later served as NATO Military Committee chairman, stated in 1968, "The lesson of American time on target is clear. Qualitative superiority in synchronization and coordination can defeat quantitative superiority in men and equipment." The computational methods developed for time on target laid groundwork for modern military technologies. The graphical firing tables and rapid calculation methods pioneered by American artillery units preceded computerized fire control systems by decades. Modern artillery systems, GPS-guided munitions, and networked military forces all trace their conceptual origins to the innovations American forces developed to achieve coordinated fire during World War II. The story of German forces encountering American time-on-target artillery represents a pivotal moment in military history. It marked the transformation of warfare from an art practiced by warriors into a science executed by integrated systems. German soldiers, products of the world's most professional military tradition, found themselves overwhelmed not by superior soldiers, but by superior organizational systems. Individual courage and tactical skill became secondary to systematic coordination and industrial capability. The thunder that arrived without warning in Normandy represented more than American firepower. It embodied the emergence of a new form of warfare, where victory belonged to those who could best organize and apply industrial power to military problems. The German Wehrmacht was defeated not by better soldiers, but by better systems, not by superior courage, but by superior coordination, not by tactical brilliance, but by industrial efficiency applied with mathematical precision to the ancient art of artillery. American time on target shattered the entire conceptual framework of traditional military thinking. The coordinated thunder that fell on German positions from 1944 to 1945 announced the arrival of a new age in warfare. Victory would belong to those who could best transform military operations into industrial processes. The systematic application of overwhelming force through precise coordination became the dominant paradigm of modern warfare. The echoes of that coordinated thunder still resonate in military doctrine worldwide. Every modern artillery system, every networked military force, every coordinated military operation owes something to the revolution that American time on target represented. The German soldiers who experienced coordinated American artillery were witnesses to the birth of a new age in human conflict, an age where industrial mathematics would prove more powerful than martial tradition and organizational efficiency would triumph over individual heroism. In this new age of industrial warfare, organization triumphed over courage, systems defeated soldiers, and coordinated timing conquered all opposition. The Germans learned this lesson under the instant, overwhelming thunder of American industrial warfare made manifest in perfectly coordinated artillery fire. This lesson transformed warfare forever, establishing principles that continue to dominate military thinking into the modern era. The coordinated thunder of American artillery in World War II marked the end of one era of warfare and the beginning of another.